What's going on, you guys? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Fit Women's Weekly Podcast. I am hanging out with you in my studio. I just finished an awesome walk, and I'll explain more on that in just a second because I think sometimes it's important to explain those things. But first, before we jump into this week's episode, welcome to the show. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I hope that you enjoy the episode, that you find some little nuggets that inspire you to go back and listen to previous episodes, and where you want to come back and hang out with me for future episodes. I put out a brand new podcast every single Wednesday on wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube in video format. And then I release a shorter episode every Friday just on audio. So if you're watching this on YouTube, but you want more, make sure to check me out over on, if you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I am over there. Now, today's episode, I want to talk about all things macros, how to calculate your calories, why track your macros, and how to actually calculate your macros too. And in terms of macros, what I'm talking about with that is particularly protein, carbohydrates, and fat. What is it that you need each of? How do you figure out what your body needs specifically? And why it's kind of important, why we want to talk about this right now. But before we jump in, let's catch up on a couple of little things. So things are going really well here in the Fit Women's Weekly studio. We are planning for a really big summer shred program, which is our 8-week annual summer challenge / program that we knock out that includes 8 weeks of workouts, 8 weeks of coaching, 8 weeks of nutrition. It is all laid out in a very easy follow along program where we check in with each other every single day. And I'm really excited about it. So it doesn't start until July, but we are getting the ball rolling now because we want it to be the best challenge that we've ever done. And yeah, so far is absolutely going to be the best, but it's really time consuming and I want to make it so perfect. I even have some awesome sponsors that are going to be doing gifts along the way. So yeah, so that's kind of where my brain has been. But in terms of my training lately, I do want to share that because I like sharing that with you guys. I have decided, I did my 50K. I know you guys are like, yeah, Kendall, we get it. You did a 50K. But I did a 50K in March. And then I've just kind of been in the state of like, what do I want to work for? I'm one of those people that likes to have goals, that likes to have something that they're focused on with their attention. And so for me personally, I have spent the past few years just running for the sake of running. And I've talked about that a lot on here, that I've run just for my own well-being, just for something for me. And while that's been great, I've definitely increased my mileage over the years. I've let my speed suffer. I actually used to be a pretty decent 5K runner back in the day in my 20s. And then in my mid 30s to where I am now, it just hasn't been a priority. I kind of hit this wall where I was like, I'm probably the fastest I'll ever be. So I'm just gonna run and not worry about speed. But I am itching I have the need for speed, you guys. So I have decided that this year I'm gonna attempt to hit a PR for my 5K, which I have not hit a PR in probably over 5 years. I really probably haven't even tried in over 5 years. And so what that means to me, when I first started getting into 5Ks, I always had the goal to get under a 21-minute race time. And that's never happened. I think my PR, and I need to go back and look at this, but I think my goal, my previous is like a 21:20 or something like that, somewhere around that. And so it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be a challenge, but on the weekends we've been focusing a little bit more on speed work, on sprinting. I've been doing some track work again, and it's just been fun to change it up. I don't know about you guys, but when the temperatures change and it goes from really cold to warmer, I am just more motivated. I'm more motivated to move my body, to have more fun with my body, to get outside. And so I want to use that. I want to harness that motivation and put it towards something, towards living my fitness. And to me, living my fitness is going out and doing cool things like that, pushing outside of my comfort zone to try to get new accomplishments. And so for me, I'm going to focus on the 5K, and I'm also getting back into handstand work. I've been saying this for years. If you are a longtime listener, you're like, oh my God, you're still not great at handstands. No, because here's the other thing, which my husband was teasing me about, because he just doesn't get it. When it is cold, we don't have heat in our studio. Well, we have heat, but we don't turn it on. There's no point, because once you get working out, you warm up. But it takes the warming up part. So when it's cold, the last thing I want to do is do handstands around the gym. Like, I'm cold, I feel like this, I just want to lock all of my muscles in and just huddle and try to get work done. So now that it's warming up and I have like the mobility back where I'm always warmed, essentially. I want to get back into some handstand work. And so that's actually something else that Dan and I, my husband, will be doing together, because his goal is to get better at parallettes. So if you guys ever do watch a video where I'm working out here in my studio, whether that's with Fit Ones Weekly Live or a workout that I put up on YouTube, and you see a set of parallettes in the background, yeah, you can't see them, they're over there. That's Dan's. He's been working on those for a couple years. So he's like, all right, I will really buckle down with my parallettes if you really buckle down on your handstand. So it's awesome to have that motivation and that accountability and support to be able to do that with somebody. And then the last thing before we jump into today's main topic, well, let me get a quick sip of coffee. Y'all, this is not sponsored by any way, shape, or form, but I found a blueberry vanilla coffee at the grocery store. I think the company is called Death Coffee. Doesn't sound very promising, but it is delicious. It has just enough blueberry where it has a little bit of flavor. I just have to put some cream in there, and it's like, and I prefer it cold. Dan tasted it, he prefers it hot. But if you're looking for a really good coffee and you want something just a little bit special feeling, this blueberry coffee is really good. I'll link it down below if you guys are interested. So I gotta tell you guys how fitness saved my life the other day. So Dan and I went to bed like normal on Sunday night. We're sleeping, we're doing our thing, and then all of a sudden we wake up to a noise. This is at 4:15 in the morning. So we have 45 minutes till the alarm goes off, which means that I am pissed because we're awake at this point, right? So we hear something, I think it's Nike, who's our cat. And so I kind of roll over, and Dan does not. He wakes me up again, like as I'm trying to fall asleep. He's like, I think something's in our room. I'm like, what do you mean something's in our room? He's like, did you hear that? I'm like, yeah, I heard that too, but I thought it was Nike. He was like, no, Nike's not in here. I got up, I checked on her. She's in the other room. So then I start thinking like, well, if there was something in our room, our cat would be there, right? But then I forget, like, it's our cat. She's not really into hunting, and she's very skittish. So it's really not a surprise. So Dan goes and gets the flashlight and is sitting on the bed with the lights on, which now I'm really mad because it's so close to our alarm going off that our night is now ruined. And there's something about waking up in the 4s, even though I'm supposed to wake up at 5 o'clock. If it's 4:58, I'm gonna be exhausted all day long. I digress. So Dan is on the bed with his flashlight, just looking around on the floor. And I'm like, Dan, if there's an animal in here, he's just as scared as we are now that we've turned the lights on and made noise. You flash, like, it's not just gonna run out on the floor. He's hiding somewhere. So I take the flashlight and I get on my hands and knees. I'm looking under the bed and looking behind dressers. Don't say anything. So we get back in bed. We're like, okay, maybe it was nothing. Turn the lights off. Start to fall back asleep, we hear it again. So then I start to think, okay, what if there's like a bat? And I guess I should have prefaced this as saying too, we left our back door open. We have a screened-in porch, and we're the second story of a building for our condo. So something getting in is really, really unlikely. However, I start to think, okay, what if a bat or a bird came in? So now instead of looking on the floor, I grab the flashlight again, we turn the lights on, and then we're looking behind the curtains and looking up to see if like something's hanging on the curtain, something like that. Nothing. At this point, it's like 4:30. We're obviously not going to bed because we hear this, like there's something making a noise, right? So we lay in bed, we both have our glasses on, lights are on. I'm kind of like closing my eyes, opening my eyes, waiting to hear this noise again. And I just happen to see some sort of movement up at our ceiling fan. I then realize there's a gigantic bug on the other side of the ceiling fan. So I yell and I jump out of bed. So that's where my fitness rolls in, because I was able to not only go from my side, I actually came off of the bed on Dan's side. So I jumped over the bed because this thing was on my side of the ceiling fan. So I jump up, of course Dan jumps up with me because I'm yelling like, oh my God, real like screams from a horror movie. And I'm pointing up, there it is, there it is. You guys, there is a cockroach that was at least 2 inches. And by cockroach, I mean palmetto bugs, that's what they're called here, this big. And it was within 10 seconds of us getting out of the bed that it finally fell through the ceiling fan and onto our bed. Had I not seen that thing, it would have waken us up on us. Oh my God. It was horrible. It was horrible. Now, granted, this is part of living in the South. We have these things called, these are not cockroaches. These are cockroaches on big time steroids. They're palmetto bugs. They're huge. We were able to kill it, but we were still really, really frazzled up over it. And oh, that is just the worst. And then one of my girlfriends was like, yeah, what if it had like crawled into your ear? I was like, thanks a lot, because I'm not an anxious person enough as it is. And that's actually one of my fears, is a bug crawling in my ear. This thing was so big though, it would not have been able to crawl into an ear. It was that big. Oh my goodness. But what was if you're like, how was that making a noise? It was trying to crawl through the ceiling fan. And every time it would get close, this thing was so big that the ceiling fan would hit it on its antennas and make that noise. It was almost like playing cards on spokes on a bike when you're little. And that was the noise it was making. That was a freaking, okay. I have to share that story because it's traumatizing if you guys can't tell. Anyways, work out so that you can move fast and react. So let's talk about macros. Let's talk about calorie counting. And I wanted to do that specifically right now because as the temperatures change, a lot of us are more motivated to hit some new fitness goals. I've had a lot of people reaching out to me recently about trying to change up their diet because they have vacations or summer, or maybe it's just because it's warm outside and you're finding yourself wanting to move more. And when you want to move more, you want to fuel your body so that you see the results from that movement, but also that you feel your best while you're moving, right? So I thought this would be a perfect time to revisit macros and calories. I have done an episode in the past on this, but repetition is the key to success. So first off, why should you track? Because if you have if you're happy where you are and you feel great, you don't need to track. But if you have specific goals that you want to reach, whether that's body recomposition, you're training for an event like a 5K, maybe you just want to lean out a little bit for a vacation, whatever the goal is, if you want to change something, then you have to make changes. That's the only way that your body goes, oh, something new is happening. I need to react to this so that I can adapt. And that's where you see changes, whether that's increasing your muscle or burning body fat. And so tracking is a really important process of that, because then it's the foolproof way of knowing what you need to do, right? You know what you're supposed to do to stay where you're at right now. And now you know what you need to do to change in order for your body to react. So you wouldn't go on a vacation to someplace you've never been before without having some sort of map, right? Whether you're using your phone or you're old like me and you remember using MapQuest and printing it all out. Regardless, you have a way to get from point A to point B so that you're not going to get lost. And that's all that tracking is as well. It's a system, it's a process so that you can go from where you are to where you want to go without any questions. It just makes it really easy. So people are always like, I don't want to track. I'm really scared I'm going to get to an unhealthy place. Just look at it as a way to collect data. And the great thing about tracking is you can technically still continue to eat whatever you want as long as you are hitting your specific macros. And that's different for everybody. So let's talk about macros a little bit, but first, in order to talk about how to calculate your macros, the first thing you have to do is calculate your calories. So you have your basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories it takes for you to just live a normal day-to-day life. But that doesn't take into consideration exercise. So then we need to figure out our total daily energy expended through our activity, right? And so there's a couple of different ways that you can go about figuring out what your maintenance calories are. You can just put in on Google metabolic rate calculator, right? And there's a lot of places that you can go to figure this out. I personally like math, so if you are like me and you like to do it yourself, I'm going to share with you guys the most scientifically proven, most reliable equation. There's a lot of different equations out there. This particular one, which is the Milfin-St. Jeor equation, is shown to be the most accurate. Now, they're not ever going to be 100% because there's so many different factors going into how your body works, right? But this is a good way to get an estimate. And so for a woman, here's what that equation is. To find your basal metabolic rate, it is 10 times your weight in kilograms plus 6.25 times your height in centimeters minus 5 times your age minus 161. So if you're like me, I created a Google sheet. I actually created a calorie counter and macro creator out of my Google Sheets for my clients, and this was the equation that I used. And then if you're curious, 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters and 1 pound is 0.4536 kilograms, so that you can do the conversions with that. And so that takes into consideration your basal, like I said, but it doesn't take into consideration what your activity is. So then you have to multiply that by your activity rate. And so there's a couple of different numbers that you get to choose from. 1.25, so you would take your calories that you figured out and multiply that by 1.25 if you're sedentary. 1.375 is if you're a lightly moderate. 1.55 if you are moderately active, and then active folks would get a factor of 1.725, and very active is 1.9. And I always have found it confusing when I go to other websites where I try to use these calculators and go like, well, how do you know which is which? So on my calculator, here's how I define it. There's a couple of different ways, and of course, nothing's gonna be exact, but just kind of like a blanket statement. To be sedentary, you're doing nothing. You sit at a desk all day, you walk around the house, but you're not getting any focused movements in, you're getting probably less than 3,000 steps a day, you're not doing much, right? 1.375 lightly active is 1 to 2 workouts per week and less than 5,000 calories most days of the week. Moderately active, I classify as 3 to 4 workouts per week and over 5,000 steps, 5,000 to 7,000 steps most days. Active is 3 to 5 high intensity workouts per week and over 7,000 steps on most days. And then very active, we're talking, you're an athlete. You are up and going, you're getting over 13,000 steps most days, you're doing 5 to 6 workouts per week. Your body is moving. Very, very, very few people are considered very active. I'm talking, really athletes. Some jobs, depending on what you do, maybe some construction workers would be considered very active, but very, very few people. Some people will say, oh, I work out 5 days per week, but how intense are those actual workouts? Even myself, I just consider myself active versus very active. And that's also mostly because my body is so adjusted to where I am that, believe it or not, I don't burn as many calories as you think I would. And that's just because I also know my body and I've tested my metabolic rate. And so I know personally when I put in the 1.9 for very active, that's way beyond what I actually burn. So I personally use active. So hopefully that helps a little bit. So that's gonna give you your total calorie amount. And so from there, what you need to do is decide what is your goal. If your goal is to maintain where you're at, then you now know your numbers. That's your number that you are going to try to uphold each day. And then maybe you're gonna manipulate your protein, your fat, just to see how you feel, right? But if you wanna burn body fat, generally speaking, you wanna lose a half a pound to 2 pounds per week, depending on where your starting weight is. But most people, we're gonna set you to where you can lose about a pound a week, and that's gonna be in a deficit of 500 calories per day. So let's say that you figured out that your calorie intake at maintenance is 2,200 calories. So then you would subtract 500 from that, and that would give you 1,700 calories, and that should have you losing some weight over time. Now, of course, nothing is written in stone. So what I always tell clients is try this out for 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll see if there's any progress made in your scale, using the scale as just a data collector, not as a way to say if you're doing things right or wrong, and that we might need to make some tweaks from here going down the line. But if you are trying to, and then if you have more weight to lose, let's say you are considered overweight, we might be able to put you in a deficit of a little bit more than 500, because you'll still probably be at it. Like, let's say your starting your starting calories are 3,000, right? If you were to take off 800 calories, you're still at 2,200 calories a day, which is still a healthy amount of calories, right? That's not gonna be so drastic. And so you're able to maintain that. But somebody who, let's say your calories for maintenance are 1,700, we don't really want to go at all below 1,200, because that's going into an unhealthy range. So really the deficit depends on where you're starting. But for most people, that 500 range is a good place to begin. So that's gonna help you figure out what are your calories that are gonna help you achieve your goal. Once you have calories figured out, now it is time to figure out your specific macros. And the first macro that you would figure out, and I'm just basically walking you guys through the steps that I go through when I am working with a client. Now, obviously when I'm working with a client, I get to know specifically what it is that they achieve, what's their lifestyle like. So their macros that I calculate are a little bit more customized to them, but this is the blanket rules that help, and maybe this will help you if you've always wondered like, hey, can I calculate my own macros? So after you figure out what your calories are, you're gonna figure out what your protein level intake should be. For most people, if you are working, so I should say this, it is generally recommended for American women to have 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per pound that they weigh. That is for a sedentary woman who has no fitness goals, who is not working out regularly, and you are not a regular person. You are working out, you're lifting weights, and so for you, the recommended amount is 0.8 to 1.1 grams of protein per pound that you weigh. So a 100-pound woman would recommend having anywhere from 100 grams to 110 grams of protein would really be my main goal. But I do understand that sometimes starting off, that hitting that 1 gram is really hard for people. And again, it really does depend on where you're starting from. If you weigh 200 pounds, then trying to get in 200 grams of protein can be a lot harder, right? So if that's the way that it falls, and if you are on the higher end of the weight spectrum, then you might want to start with your grams of protein more at the 0.8 and then work on slowly increasing that over time as you get adjusted to having that kind of intake. But for most people, we are able to start with them at a 1-to-1. So that would be what I recommend. So then after you have your protein intake, what you would do to figure out what percentage that is for each gram of protein has 4 calories. So 1 gram of protein has 4 calories. So if you're eating 100 grams of protein, that's 400 grams of, that's 400 calories, right? So then what you can do from there is take the total amount of calories that you're supposed to eat, subtract the 400, or not subtract the 400, take the 400, divide that by the amount of calories total that you're supposed to have, and it gives you the percentage of protein for your diet. From there, your next goal is to look at fat. So for fat, you want to keep your fat intake between 25 to 35 grams of grams of fat. For most people, I would say 95% of people, we're able to keep fat intake at 30%, which is the ideal amount. So 30%, pretty easy number. You take that 30%, you're gonna multiply that times the total number of calories that you are supposed to be eating. That's gonna spit out the number of calories of protein that you, I keep saying protein, sorry. It's gonna give you the number of calories of fat that you're supposed to be eating. 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. So you're gonna take that big number of calories, divide it by 9, and that will give you how many fat grams you're supposed to eat per day. So now we have figured out your protein, we have figured out your fat. The last thing that we're gonna do is figure out your carbohydrates. And in order to do that, we now know the percentage of protein that you're supposed to be eating. We know the percentage of fat that you're supposed to be eating. So you can add that up. So let's say you're doing 40% of your diet in protein, 30% of your diet in fat. That is 70, right? Yes, that is 70%. So that means you have 30% left of your calories that will then go to carbohydrates. And just like protein, 1 gram of carbs has 4 calories. So you're gonna take your calorie number, your big number that you're supposed to eat, multiply that by 0.30. That'll give you your calories of carbohydrates that you have allotted. And then you will divide that by 4, and guess what happens? It spits out the number of grams of carbohydrates that you'll eat per day. Now, I know that this is a lot of math, and some of you guys might be interested in this, and some of you guys might be like, this is kind of boring. But I do want to put this out here as a tool that even maybe down the line, you go, hey, I think Kendall did a podcast on how to calculate my macros. I'd really like to try to figure this out and do it myself. I feel like that is a skill. So hopefully this helps. If it does, let me know, you guys. If you're like, this is so boring, I never want to see this again, it won't hurt my feelings either. So that's it. So now you know what your calories are in order to hit your goals. What is your deficit or what is your maintenance? And even if you want to increase your protein because you want to bulk, for most people, you're going to increase your y'all, can you tell I really love protein? I cannot talk today. Even if you want to go into a bulk, you have to increase your calories. And for an increased calories, we're most likely to increase by 300 to 400 for a woman in order to make sure that you're really focusing on building muscle and not putting in so much calories that you're gonna be also adding on a lot of body fat. Now, adding a little bit of body fat is just gonna happen in the process, but we do wanna try to have as much control over that as possible. So that's why it's just a smaller number, 300 to 400 extra calories, with a really good progressive overload training plan, and then tracking your macros and calculating the way that we just did would work the exact same way for a bulk. So there you go. So now, once you have that, let's quickly give a rundown about how to utilize that. So you have your numbers. Now what? Now is when you're gonna open an app. I'm gonna talk about MyFitnessPal just because that's the one that I'm the most familiar with, but I know obviously there are so many different options out there nowadays. So when you have MyFitnessPal, you're gonna log in and it's gonna ask you what is your weight and your age, and it's gonna recommend macros for you. Do not listen to what they try to tell you. Chances are they're gonna tell you to eat 1,200 calories and give you the wrong, they're just gonna give you the standard American diet recommended macronutrients, whereas we just did you a favor by doing your specific macros for your specific goals. So what you're gonna do is in the app, there's gonna be 3 little dots on the bottom, dot, dot, dot. You're gonna hit that, and then there's another option that goes to goals. You're gonna hit the goal button, and then you'll see an option that says calories and macronutrients. You're gonna hit that button, and there you're able to put in everything that we just calculated. Just make sure to hit the save button, because if you just move everything around and then hit the X, it doesn't save it. I have learned that the hard way. And then you're ready to hit the ground running. I recommend never going into a day blindly. So don't just wake up in the morning and say, you know, I'm just gonna wing this and see what happens. That's how you end up at nighttime going, oh man, I still have 40 grams of protein left and 1 gram of carb. What am I supposed to do? So especially when you're first getting started, it's probably gonna take you a little bit longer the first time. If you're not used to it, take 10 to 15 minutes to sit down at night and plan out what is it that you plan to have for breakfast. Are you gonna have an omelet or a shake or coffee with collagen, whatever it is? Go ahead and put that in. Go ahead and put in what you plan to eat for lunch, what you have in your house, nothing that you have to go out and buy. Like, what is it that you typically eat? Put that in there. Same thing for dinner. What do you plan to have for dinner tomorrow night? Go ahead and map it out. And then see where you fall. If you find that you're lower in protein, from there, you can go and re-manipulate everything. So you can go back into your lunch and say, okay, well, instead of having 4 ounces of chicken, I'm gonna do 6 ounces of chicken. Or maybe I'm low in carbohydrates. Instead of having, I don't know, 1/4 of a cup, which would probably be in grams, because I do recommend a food scale. 1/4 of a cup of pasta, I'm gonna have 3/4 of a cup of pasta to increase it. Whatever the case is, kind of manipulate it and then see how far you go. I love tracking because to me it's like a game. It's like, how close can I get to my actual numbers? And give yourself some grace. You're not gonna be perfect. The first things that I would recommend is working on trying to get to your calories and hitting your protein. Everything else will kind of fall into place naturally. Now, I will also say there's human errors when it comes to putting information into those tracking apps. So you might hit your calories perfect, but it'll still tell you that you're off on your macronutrients, or you might hit your protein and you might hit your fat, but yet for some reason, I mean, technically you should then have everything figured out, you're still off, and that's just human. You're never gonna fall perfectly, but you can get pretty gosh darn close. So the first thing to try to hit is your calories and your protein. After that, hitting the other 2 things are pretty easy to do. Most people tend to go over, and fat's really easy, and for women, we have a hard time hitting our protein. I'm actually the opposite. I went over my protein yesterday by 10 grams, because I just eat a lot of protein. I have just adjusted that to be my nutrition lifestyle over the past couple of years. So yeah, and then you have fun with it. There are a lot of cool things in MyFitnessPal that you can do, like saving meals. So if you tend to have the same thing every single day for breakfast, where you're like 2 eggs, an ounce of cheese, bell peppers, mushrooms, whatever the case is. If you find that you have that every single day, like my husband eats the same thing, I can just save that as a meal. So instead of having to cut and paste everything in there, I can just save it and just say breakfast, or like Kendall's daily breakfast or something like that. And so then it's always in the system. Or if you like have found a day that works for you and you don't mind eating the same things over and over, you can just go in and say copy yesterday, and all of yesterday's foods will then come in to today's as well. So there's a couple of different ways to navigate that to make it easier for you, but don't overcomplicate things. That's why I really suggest having that day before each night, sitting down to plan it out versus trying to go through the day of and just like as you're eating trying to figure things out. That's where it gets hard, it gets frustrating, and you're gonna be like, I can't do this, it's too complicated. It's not too complicated, you can do it. And by playing around with this, you also learn how your body runs optimally, and that is always the best gift. People are always like, but then shouldn't you learn to eat intuitively? Yeah, you should. This is actually teaching you how to eat intuitively, because these are the things that your body needs. Over time, we've adjusted to not eating intuitively simply because we're on the go, we go more towards cravings, we kind of have lost the ability to learn about what our body really needs over time. And this is helping to reinforce, like, this is how much protein your body needs, this is how much fat. And as you do that after a couple of weeks, you'll naturally start hitting those numbers without even really trying. And you'll also get a better understanding of food as well. Like if you sit down, you're like, man, I need 10 more grams of carbohydrates, but I'm already out of protein. You start to be able to learn what is a good just carbohydrate source, what is just a good protein source, what is just a good fat source. So for us to end, I will name a couple. So some really good just protein sources might include rice, pastas, oatmeal are good options. Things for really good protein sources are any type of meat, okay? You're gonna get like basically chicken breast, you're not gonna get anything except for protein. Something like chicken thighs, you're gonna get protein and some fat, so keep that into consideration. Things like bison, which is a really lean meat, you're gonna focus again mostly on protein. And then as far as fat sources are concerned, eggs are a good source of fat. Things like butter, ghee, using different types of oils when you cook. Do not be afraid of oils, but if I'm cooking and I'm just doing like a saute and I'm just lining the pan, I don't really track that. But if I'm doing like a salad dressing where I'm doing a tablespoon or two of oil, then of course I'm gonna track that. So again, don't overcomplicate it. I'm not one of those people that tracks gum. I don't track my coffee. I know most people do. Literally, this is coffee with about a tablespoon of milk in it. It's just a light coffee. And so I'm not gonna take the time to do that. It's so non-negotiable, but I've also been doing this for so long. If I had 3 cups of coffee, then yes, but 1 cup, I think I'm okay. So hopefully this total calorie tracker / macro session has helped you. If it did, let me know and I will be glad to answer any questions that you have, help you get off the ground running. But in the summer shred, I will be doing macros and calculations for people, so another reason to join in on the challenge. Now, if you want to hang out with me more, make sure to go to fitwomansweekly.com so you can learn more about me as well as my online training studio, where I go live every single day with 2 brand new workouts and a coaching class. That's what I got coming up next here in the studio. And I put out a new podcast on YouTube every single week and on every platform every Wednesday, and then on every platform as well every Friday for a shorter Fit Quickie Friday. All right, you guys, have yourself a beautiful day. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, and I will be back soon.